Larry, welcome to Talk Python to me. Awesome to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I saw your project, PyView, and you're like, oh, hey, maybe you could just give it a little shout out. I'm like, this is super neat the way this thing works. And it's, as most people know who listen, I'm a big fan of web development. The last episode that we just released, not actually the one time shifting because of recording podcasts, was with all the creators of the popular Python web frameworks as a panel, and that was super popular. So here we are back with another web topic, PyView, and it's got a really, really unique twist, and I think people are gonna dig it. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, thanks. No, yeah, I think, I've been doing technology for a long time now, and I think the web has always just been amazing, right? It's an amazing platform. And so I think that's why people kind of gravitate towards, web frameworks and interesting web technologies and what can you do now and how can we make it easier. And yeah, it's funny. I did think PyView would resonate with you a little bit just because I know that, I don't know if this is true, but it seems like you do appreciate really not just obviously Python, but web technologies, and especially like embracing web technologies and maybe not necessarily kind of hiding them.
Yeah, exactly. That is one of the things that really appealed to me, because there are some Python frameworks that build web apps, but their goal is to pretend that HTML and CSS is really bad. It's like, you don't want to write assembly, we're going to put that away from you. And you don't need to see this HTML or the CSS or any of those things. Get it away, and and I feel like something is lost there. Like, building on the web is it's like the perfect clay, right? It is so malleable, and it can become almost anything that you want it to be. And a lot of those frameworks, I think they just miss that. And I don't feel like what you built does. So I think we're having a good time talking about it.
No, thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
But quick introduction. Larry, who are you? What do you do?
Thanks. Yeah, so my name is Larry Ogrodnek. I've been a software developer for, I guess let's just say over 25 years now. I don't want to age myself too much, but, through that time, obviously, I've done a bunch of different things and, worked at startups. I worked at big companies. I worked at, I did freelancing for a few years even. And so my early career, it was more kind of on the C, Perl side, a lot of back-end work, diving into Java and then Scala. And, when I was doing freelancing, obviously the language of the tech kind of depended on what the client wanted to do and what the project entailed. But that's kind of when I started to get more serious about using Python. And, nowadays I work at a startup in the construction industry. And we think of ourselves,
Nice.
But we're really trying to invest heavily in technology and software. Like, we're trying to be a technology-enabled home builder. And so we have a huge investment, and we have, not necessarily a huge tech team, but, spending any money and employment on tech is kind of a big deal in this industry. And I think it's an industry that hasn't really had technology, get great adoption. Different people are doing different things, but overall, there's been a hard time to kind of get it in that process. But there's a lot of areas for improvement. And so, we're trying to make that process better, faster, smoother, more cost.
I think there's a lot of possibility for pick your underserved by tech specialization and build businesses around there. If you're a Python developer or any kind of developer, but if you really have the skill to build things like connecting APIs and automations and stuff, it's just such fertile ground. It's like, wow, there's nobody building stuff here that is like good. Let's go. I could do this, right?
100%. And I think, like to your point, there's a lot of kind of low hanging fruit where it's just like even getting some of the information in people's heads in a structured way, and even having like different processes defined in a structured way. Like, you get huge improvements from that. And this is kind of just like why we love technology, right? Is you have these building blocks, and it's like, oh, now that we have this in a structured format, we can actually do these interesting things with it that we couldn't do before because it was just, on someone's notepad or whatever. And so, yeah, you're right. I think there's still a lot of industries like that. And home building is for sure a big one. It's been interesting. I mean, our main actually like construction platform that manages our construction projects. So we have an interesting, part of that, what you were saying is it can be hard in underserved technologies. Underserved areas like to sort of have that domain expertise. And so you have to find a good partner. And one of the things we've done is we actually build the homes. So we're not just writing software for other builders to use, but we're building homes ourselves. And that's been a huge benefit because we have people building homes that we can sit down with and say, like, does this make sense? Like, does it not make sense? Like, why not? And, we have to obviously push on both sides sometimes because we are trying to change things, right? But that's been, I think it'd be almost impossible to do without.
It's the dog fooding equivalent, the software dog fooding, right?
Exactly.
Like you're building, they're building, you're building. So then you can.
I know, and it can be frustrating to get these phone calls like, "Why isn't this working? Like, you're going to make me late for this or that." But again, like having those really strong partnerships, like I don't know, it's critical to be able to get something that actually works.
Yeah, well, it sounds actually super exciting. I mean, I know you told us like, we're just working in the building. No, this is cool.
It's cool, yeah. And for the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot on our, kind of more AI services team. And like, I'm not a machine learning researcher, but most of the work I've been doing has been around kind of productionalizing, that work and building services around it. And we've done really cool stuff like with, just like pricing models for the homes, which is kind of more traditional machine learning stuff. And then like schedule simulation stuff. And more recently, a lot of LLM based stuff, both for kind of like, RAG style chat workflows. Like you can imagine you're in the field and you're like, is this the right tile pattern? And maybe that's buried on like page 500 of a Google spreadsheet or something like that. And being able to pull that quickly is huge. And now some of the stuff we're trying to do is more around automating schedule updates. So someone can kind of walk through a home and just, do kind of stream of consciousness, like, this is the status of like this, like, this is running late, whatever. And then we have a multi-stage process, but we kind of, turn the video into images and turn the transcription into notes and then try and like see what's in the photo, right? Like, is that the right tile pattern? Is that the right stove? And use LMs for different parts of this process to kind of, come up with recommendations at the end. Like, oh, it actually looks like the drywall is totally installed and we can mark that as done or whatever. And, having the automation is actually super helpful because having up-to-date schedules drives a lot of stuff, right? It's just like the efficiency of making sure people are on site and not delayed is huge. So that's been
There's so many touch points of so many subcontractors and things, right? Like, when is the plumber going to be here? Well, they need to be here when the inspection for plumbing is here, but that got, like, it's people who haven't gone through like somehow some kind of a house. Like, I had a big home improvement's not quite the right word, but like this big outside project with like a barbecue thing and so on done. And wow, after doing that, I'm like, I've got a lot of ideas for making this better. This is bad.
No, I know, right? And some of those delays are like super costly. And it's funny because like a lot of things are thinking in terms of like budgeting, like, right? Like if you buy too much material, that's bad because you're wasting money. But if you buy too little, that's actually even worse because like maybe, you need more whatever lumber and maybe there's, 2 weeks, turnaround time to get it. And so, and again, if you have to reschedule things like inspections, who knows when the next available one is, it might push the project out, weeks. And so, there's a lot of interdependencies and a lot of, like you said, people and communication remains a very tricky problem. So that's always one of the things.
Well, it sounds awesome. And I'm also interested to see if your project at all touches on that. But let's dive in. Let's dive into PyView. Now, the first thing I want to point out here with PyView is it is not PyWebView, which has been around for 3 or 4 years at minimum. And I imagine that like a lot of people have seen this. PyWebView is a way to embed basically a browser into something that you can wrap as a desktop app. PyView, totally different. What's the elevator pitch on PyView?
Totally different, yeah. So the elevator pitch in PyView is basically, it's one of those self-referential things. Hopefully I won't try and say Phoenix LiveView, but when you're building modern web apps, and this is one of the things that I've seen, right, is, if you want to have this rich interactivity, you want to have like a really rich client experience, maybe you reach for something like React or Vue, and those are great frameworks. But then you also have your backend server maybe managing, the state and the database and those relationships, and maybe talking to other servers. And maybe that's in Python or, another language, whatever. And you kind of have to manage these two different pieces, and they each have their own state. And it's very, there can be a lot of complexity when the client is showing something slightly different than the server or vice versa, and having to synchronize that state and keep them in sync. Plus, often there's a lot of glue code in between them, right? Like having to just go from the Python backend to the JavaScript front end and back and forth. Even when things are in the same language, like I've worked on TypeScript apps where it's TypeScript backend and front end, it's kind of rare that you actually share a lot of code for that layer. Things end up kind of drifting anyway and being different. And so PyView, the idea is, what if you can have your backend server manage all your state, you're writing all your application logic in Python, you're just rendering HTML like you would for a static site. But when different interactions happen, like when a user clicks a button or enters a form field, or different things happen on the front end, we send an event to the server. The server processes the event and changes its state. So for example, this is a simple counter example, but you press plus on the counter. Then the server increments the count by 1. It does a full re-render, but it does kind of a diff and says, oh, actually, looking at this full page, all I need to do is tell the front end to change 0 to 1. And so it efficiently sends that over a WebSocket connection. And I feel like there's already a lot there that maybe that wasn't the clearest description, but the idea is kind of more like, can we get SPA level interactivity, including things like multi-user present stuff, server push, really fast UI updates, really fast local navigation, not doing full page reloads. But on the back end, our mental model really is something like a traditional static, not static site generator, but like a static rendering thing. So I don't know. Was that clear?
Yeah. I think, yes. It sounds like a lot. And what I think is cool about PyView is that it takes a lot of that and it just makes it automatic over a simple programming API, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing, is you don't have to think about a lot of this kind of plumbing. And this is the one kind, we'll get into this more. Like this isn't something that an idea that I came up with. This is something that has been around for a little while on in the Elixir side. It comes from this thing called Phoenix LiveView. But yeah, a framework actually can take care of a lot of this for us. And so as developers, all we really need to worry about is updating our state when events come in, and rendering, doing a render of this is, given this state, what should we render to the backend? And the framework manages the WebSocket connection, it manages the messages, it manages doing the diffing. And so we don't have to think about any of that. We really just need to think about, how do I update my state and how do I render the website? And so it ends up being really powerful, just having these very simple building blocks. And this is the kind of thing that, I'm not anti-JavaScript in general, but obviously we're using JavaScript on the front end. But by having this very kind of generic JavaScript layer that just knows really simple things like, here's how I send messages when a button is pressed or when a text field changes. Like there's very simple building blocks, but you end up getting this very powerful system when you bring them together. And you don't really have to write JavaScript for these interactions because, again, most of the things are very simple. It's like, I need to change whatever.
Yeah. So your project is pretty new, which I'm hoping to shine a light on it because I think it's going to get a lot of attention out in the audience. Alessio points out that, hey, this is kind of like HTMX and Django with fragments, but over WebSockets. And yeah, I feel like it does have some HTMX vibes. And for those of you who haven't tried it, HTMX is like you sprinkle just a couple of extra attributes on there, and then somehow behind the scenes, there's additional communication that you don't worry about. It's just say, oh, if somebody clicks this image, actually do this server thing and replace part of the page, maybe the image, maybe something else, with the server HTML response. Like, how do you feel that like PyView, Phoenix LiveView sort of relates to that, and like DataStar, who I'm going to have on the
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I
podcast
think
soon.
that's yeah, that's a very yeah, thoughtful comment, because I think that is a lot of it. And if I had to think in terms of like comparisons to different frameworks, I think doing something with HTMX probably is the closest comparison, because again, it's HTML based. We are responding to events and wiring up to the server and processing them and sending back HTML fragments. I think the difference is that PyView is a little more structured, right? Because like with HTMX, you have a lot more control, which can be a good thing, but it's a little more, you're kind of wiring up these things yourself to a certain extent, saying like, when you click on this, call this backend route, and replace the contents of this this element with the response from that. And on the back end, you're sending full HTML and things like that. So that's one difference is, so yes, it is over WebSockets, PyView versus HTMX. The other thing is we do have this kind of diffing, technology where we're only sending what actually changed. So, I mean, we can go into more detail at some point about how the templating works, but for something like changing an encounter from 0 to 1, it's like we're really just sending back, the 1. And obviously, as the page gets more complex, the diffs get more complex, but we're just sending the diffs. And again, like the framework kind of handles you don't have, as a developer, you don't have to think about what part of the page do I update, and that's kind of encoded to a certain extent in your template, but it's kind of more hands-off, and so you do give up some flexibility, but then the framework kind of gets to handle a lot of things for you in a smoother integrated way, I would say.
Yeah, just handles it. Yeah, with HTMX, which I am a fan of, you have to think about every little piece, and you say if somebody interacts with this part, then I want this action to happen, and then this thing over here, these parts of the pages are going to be where the response of the server gets redirected back into, and it seems like it's more just handled a little bit here. Let's talk a little bit about Phoenix LiveView, because while your project is pretty new, Phoenix LiveView has, I don't know how old it is, I mean, a couple years, it looks like, but it's got 6,700 stars. So it's a really solid foundation. And your project, what's the relationship between PyView and Phoenix LiveView?
Right. So LiveView is obviously the inspiration for PyView. I think, when I don't know, when I started thinking about like, there's got to be a better way to building these kinds of apps in Python, I came across Phoenix LiveView and kind of really loved this model, especially just, I don't know, I do like thinking this event kind of based system. And it seemed like, yeah, you get all the really nice things for free. So it definitely was the inspiration. And then when I started working on PyView, I had the thought like, well, they've already kind of figured out a good model for how this works and how things fit together. And they already have a good client-side story for implementing the client-side component of this. So what I try to do with PyView is I actually use, I ship the Phoenix LiveView front-end client JavaScript is what you're running in a PyView app on your front end. And I kind of implemented a Python backend. So if you think about LiveView as a protocol, which to be clear, it is not, like there's sort of just some, have to do some reverse engineering of how things work. It's not really documented because I think, on their end, it really is an internal implementation detail about how the front end communicates with the backend. But we get that really was a huge boost for me because I get to use their client JavaScript, which handles all the diffing. And again, a big part of it too is just kind of they do have a really nice design. So like you mentioned, yeah, Phoenix LiveView has been around for a while. It's a very popular project. I think if you are in this ecosystem, so it's written in Elixir, which is a different programming language that runs on like the Erlang virtual machine. And it's, just to be clear, it's a totally great language, has a lot of really cool features. It's nothing against Elixir. It's just that, for different reasons, right? I wanted this paradigm like in the Python world because I'm working, especially at work, I'm working on Python apps, and that's the kind of world I live in. And, we can't change everything over to different languages. Just,
and I'll throw it out there for you. You don't have to take the bullets, but I think functional programming languages are super interesting. They apply really well in certain to solve certain problems. And I know some people, it's the hammer for all nails, but for most people, functional programming is it's just not what they're working in. Things where you can change variables and have state turn out to be more productive ways to write code, even if it maybe is not provably as correct or as thread safe or whatever, right? Like, so if most people are going to adopt it, most people are not using functional programming languages, and Erlang in particular, Python happens to be more popular than Erlang.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
there's
Alexa, rather.
I'll let you take those bullets, Michael. But yeah, I mean, look, different languages are good for different use cases, right? And but again, I think it's a really great idea that I thought, let me steal this. And so yeah, this is something that was written by, I think, Chris McCord is like the author of LiveView, and it's been around, for a long time, and it's gone through different iterations. But yeah, it's incredibly popular in that ecosystem, and yeah, they've done, I think, really great things with it.
Yeah, and let's. I'm just going to give a little shout out. If you go to the Phoenix LiveView GitHub, which of course I'll link in the show notes, there's a live demo on Fly that you can check out, and there's also a 2-minute video. Watch the 2-minute video. It really shows like, okay, this is quite an interesting and quite capable technology. It might sound like, oh, you can't do very much with this because, I don't know. It seems like it's only built to make a few things easy. After watching what he built there with this app with Phoenix LiveView, I was impressed. It's quite flexible.
No, for sure. And there's a lot of I think it took a lot of work to get there too, right? Just to give, them a little more, a lot of credit, because a lot of the things, I mean, it's interesting because once you take this approach to having everything over WebSockets, well, then actually it's pretty great because it opens up a lot of things that could be hard, like things like presence, like knowing different users that are, on the same document or page as you, or like server pushes. You kind of get a lot of that stuff, not, for free, but it's easy when that's kind of your base layer is everything over WebSockets. But then some things like file uploads, as part of this, they invented a way to kind of do file uploads over WebSockets.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because how do you do that, right? And WebSockets do support both text and binary messages, so it's not as crazy as you would think. But there is a limit to, you have to kind of chunk it and stuff like that. But so it supports that. And I mean, again, we can talk more about file uploads. There are other options for also going direct to S3 or different things. But yeah, a lot of work has gone into this, and including around the optimization. What is that message format? How do you send minimal diffs? For not just things simple template changes, but when you have lists or components, or maybe you have huge lists of things, how do you efficiently manage that on both the server side and the client side? And so I think there's a lot of great ideas for dealing with this that were pioneered by Phoenix LiveView that I get to come along and kind of just to steal.
Yeah, that's cool. Here's the Python version.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of was a lot of the focus early on was trying to stick to this, just because again, this PyView, like you said, it is very early days, and it is just kind of a personal side project. Although we are, I am using it at my day job for a couple kind of production apps now, which has been fantastic. But as a single developer with this is a Python web framework as a side project, it's it was great to sort of have a little bit of a roadmap on if I kind of follow these patterns, I'm probably gonna end up in a good place. And I did. Of course, I did try and make things more Pythonic where I could. So PyView is very heavily typed, so we're using obviously Python types for everything, whereas Elixir, I think they're adding types now. It's been an ongoing thing to sort of add some gradual typing like Python has done, but Python is a little further along in terms of the typing story there. And I think over time, maybe we'll diverge a little bit in terms of making the APIs more Pythonic, to the extent anything is not. But yeah, for sure, having this kind of at least this core level, protocol has been useful to follow.
Yeah, they've kind of worked out how the exchange works and all those different things. You're okay, let me do the
and I sort of have a roadmap to oh, these are the problems you're gonna get into, because that's when I first started PyView, So like I did start it a couple years ago, just as a very, but again, like, very, sparse, like, can I get like anything to show up on the page, right, over WebSockets, and then kind of iterated. And like, it's interesting to, when I started the first version of the LiveView client JavaScript I used, then figuring out what changed between that and like the next version and the next version and the next version. It's like you get to see the gradual progression of like, oh, these are some problems we're going to run into because they've sort of addressed that in this future version. But I still have to deal with it. But I'll get there at some point,
Yeah, I go look at the closed GitHub issues. And you're like, whoa, there's a lot of conversation around this one.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I think a nice thing to do for people would be to just do like a quick walkthrough, because you've got a nice little getting started thing. We just got to be careful that most people are listening, not seeing. But let's maybe talk through what it means to create just like a real simple program in PyView.
Sure. Yeah. So I do. So the documentation is something, again, it's a work in progress, but I did try to start getting some things together. So yeah, I do have a cookie cutter project. And I think, the first one in documentation, if you check out the cookie cutter project, it gives you like a very quick project setup. Sorry, I'm just going on.
Yeah, for people who don't know, like cookie cutter is a way to take a pre-structured set of source files of all varieties, even images and other things, and say, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm going to do a little text replace, and then I'm going to generate that structure for you. So a very nice way to kind of go like, all right, we got everything set up for you to get started, right?
Right, exactly. Because I really wanted to get, part of the thought with PyView is I really do want it to be super easy to get started, not just for other people, but also for myself, right? Like if I have a new idea of something, it's like I want to go from 0 to 1 super quickly, and that's kind of been part of the motivation. And so this cookie cutter is a great way to. So you check out the cookie cutter, and then you basically have a working example right away with just the simple counter. And so this example uses Poetry for dependency management. So if you do Poetry install, and then it also includes just, which is a command line runner. So just, it's kind of like, I don't know if you talked about this before, but if anyone's ever used like make files or things like that for, doing common project tasks, just is a tool like that, but specifically written for these types of things. And so if you use make files, there's like a lot of tricks you have to do to kind of get it to work in the way you want versus like as a build tool. And so just kind of works the right way a lot easier, and it's something that I've kind of
exactly
using more and more. So if you check out if you run the cookie cutter, run Poetry install, and then run just, it'll tell you to open localhost 88 or 8000 in your browser, and you'll have a counter example up and running already. And the kind of interesting thing, if you want to play along with this more, and I do have this in the docs in terms of like what's going on here, but it's a really good example to kind of open up in Firefox or Chrome, and then open the inspector or the developer tools and the network tab. And when you load the page, what you'll see is, and this is kind of the LiveView model is, right, there's an initial page load, which is like the server. So it goes to your view, and it runs your templating logic, and it returns that as just straight HTML, like a normal web page. So if you turned off JavaScript, you'd still get the page back. But if you have JavaScript on, which is obviously the intention, then what happens is included in that initial page load is some JavaScript that comes back. Oh, so you have it open, like, oh yeah. So if you yeah, exactly. So the HTML is right there. So that's like the full HTML of the page. So yeah, if you had turned off JavaScript, that part would still work. But then if you click on the, do you see in there a WebSocket connection in your?
Oh yeah, somewhere socket. Yep.
So if you click on that, you can see the messages back and forth. So when you click on the messages tab there, yeah, and so you can see.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a whole set of examples, or live interactive examples, and people can just go to pyview.rocks and click live examples and do this to see it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is super cool.
You can see that message you have right there. It says diff 0, 1. So like 0 is like the kind of slot in the template. And so it says now that should be 1. So if you click, plus again, then the new message will be diff, whatever. And you can see this message says event increment. So this is what goes to your backend, is you're getting a click event for increment, and you're sending back a response. And so yeah, it's.
So does it like instrument your HTML with like a bunch of identifiers or something like that to then be able to do this?
Yeah, and so that was one of the things that like I've been so unhappy with for a while with PyView is because like when I first started doing this, I was like, okay, I want a nice HTML templating language, right? And or maybe even it'd be better if it was pluggable, if you could use like whatever templating language you want. But the problem is most Python templating languages, kind of the input is like your template and some data, and the output is like a string. And for this, what we're trying to produce is like a render tree. And so really the mental model is a lot more like T-strings, if people are familiar with T-strings, where you have like a template, right? Your HTML template, and it's separated into static parts, like strings, and dynamic parts, like things to be evaluated. And that's kind of the LiveView model, and the PyView model is like, basically we take a template and we convert it into a list of statics and dynamics. And each dynamic, like each evaluation spot itself is, has static parts and dynamic parts. And so we have to take an HTML template and turn it into this render tree. And so yeah, again, this is like a huge pain point because I couldn't find a templating language that would let me kind of get that level of control. And maybe there is one and I'm not familiar with it, or maybe there is a way to get to these internals. I'm not familiar with it. But what I ended up doing was there is this library called IBIS, which someone had wrote an open source as like a kind of tutorial on how to write your own templating language. And so it's very similar to Jinja 2, but a lot simpler. And so that was the initial templating language for PyView, because I could kind of hack it just enough to get, both HTML and also this kind of more template-like view that I need. This is one of the things that I'm very excited about with like now that we have T-strings in 3.14. Is that I think that model, just maps so directly to this. And I'm hopeful that we'll have a lot of different rendering libraries or templating language for HTML. Like I know there's already a good one, it's a work in progress called TDOM that people are working on to make kind of, T-strings more HTML, not, friendly, not that they're not already, but, there's certain things you want. Like obviously you want to be able to just do automatic escaping of, user input. So it's not malicious, maybe even merging things like HTML attributes. Like there's nicer things you can kind of do when you're thinking about the HTML use case, right? But I like having like a template as like the core building block, because if you can get to a template, that's super easy to turn into like the structure we need for a live view. And I imagine there'll be multiple ways to do that in the future,
Yeah, very interesting. It sounds a little bit like almost a concrete syntax tree of the DOM that you've got to like, okay, we got to understand all the pieces and what parts get pushed down. Like from here down is the chunk we got to send down because this part changed.
Exactly.
And so on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, it is a little bit like that. Because there's, it's not even as simple as like this, because there is like some special handling for things like components, are sort of managed slightly differently. And then even kind of that, like if you had, this is like not a great example, but if you had multiple counters on your page, maybe you'd want to optimize like, well, they really just need one set of static content for all the counters, even though we kind of want to manage them separately. And so there's different optimizations like that are done. But yeah, it is, everything comes from this kind of render tree is how we can do those diffs.
Okay. Let's talk through these examples a tad more, and we don't necessarily need this going. But, back to the Alessio pointed out, the HTMX example. If you go to the HTMX website, there's a bunch of cool live examples there as well. And literally in the page, Carson has put it such that you see these exchanges as you interact with it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like how significant that is. So maybe let's pick out just a couple of the examples here that like we could talk through that you think are worth pointing out some of the capabilities or inspiring but not insane. I don't know.
Sure. Like a really quick one is this volume control, like the third one up at the top, which is just, it's not like a super interesting example, but just the thing that I like about it is that it has like keyboard control. So you can see like, it's super easy to just do keyboard bindings. And this is one of those things where like
just arrow keys.
Yeah, which seems like a small
not
thing.
using the mouse, folks. And there it goes.
Seems like a small thing, but it's one of those things when you start to dive into, right? Like, even like sometimes you might wonder, like, why are there all these different HTML component libraries that do things like a button? It's just like, well, when you want to think about things like accessibility and different languages and blah, 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 like there's actually a lot that goes into it. And so something like keyboard bindings is something I honestly would never take the time to add to a web app before, because it just seems like such an undertaking, even though like you could say like, oh, it's simple. You just add like event handlers to all your things and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it was just like slightly out of like adding to like a example project, right? But now it's because it's built into the framework. It's super easy, and it gets treated the same as any other event, right? So like pressing a key up or key down, sending an event, just like clicking the button. And so it's one of those things.
Awesome.
It's a simple example, but it's
Yeah, so let me describe it for listeners. So you've got this progress bar looking thing that's the volume control, like your standard Mac OS looking thing, and it's got a mute button, a max volume, an up and down button, and these are like buttons that you might be used to, but also you can just use the arrow keys, and it's just as if you're clicking the button, and it all updates, even with like probably what are those CSS transitions to make it feel a little animated instead of jumping. Yeah, looks really nice. So what about the source? Like, I think there's a couple interesting things here. First of all, the volume.html, this looks Tailwind, is that right?
Yeah, this is using Tailwind. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it's one of those things where my first pass of this examples website used almost no HTML CSS and was like super ugly, but because I kind of wanted the focus to be on like what are you really writing versus like what is
Yeah.
But I kind of gave in and used Tailwind just because it looks a lot nicer and looks more professional, something people would want to pick up, right?
Yeah, I think this gets lost sometimes in different projects, because I look at a lot of people send me projects all the time and like, hey, do you think this is what we're talking about in various venues or whatever? Having something that looks like, oh, I wish my app looked like that or it did like that, is highly inspiring.
Right.
It's not, if you had like, hey, look, we have all of our live demos and they're exactly like 1993 web view like appearance, but see how easy it is to program. You're like,
right.
Okay. I know if you look at the source, it's full of, like P8 for padding 8 and, such and such. It's worth it.
Right.
It's so worth it. And the HTML is just pure HTML, except for you have this sort of attribute driven things, right? So
right, exactly.
Maybe talk about like how's the HTML different than.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So for this example, the difference is, right, for a button, we have this PHX click attribute, which is what tells wires up with Phoenix LiveView that when someone clicks on this, we should send this event called. So the first one says PHX click equals down, and so when someone clicks on that button, we send an event to the server that just says like click down. And there's also this PHX window key down and PHX key. So, basically we're sending like a key update, for this arrow down is like one of the keys. And so these parts are not something that again, this is like just the straight Phoenix. Like if you were an Elixir app, it would work exactly the same way. You could take this HTML and run it on an Elixir app. And if you had the Elixir backend, it would, it would work exactly the same way. So that side looks exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, what's the value in renaming that to PYW or something? Right?
Yeah, I know. And actually, I think you could. I think they do have it. They do have it like configurable with the client JavaScript, where you can like do a different specifier if you wanted to. But it's kind of nice this way. I mean, I think the other thing is too, like in the age of LLMs, and just even examples, like at this point, there's a ton more Phoenix LiveView code than there is PyView code. And so if you find a good LiveView example, it's like you can get it to work in PyView, hopefully.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in a sense, the front end stuff is API compatible with both backends, maybe. Is that it?
Yeah, close? Sort of. Although, I mean, like, yeah, in like conceptually, I mean, I think that the thing is the Phoenix LiveView has a different templating language. So things like, like loops or conditionals look totally different, right?
So you might be able to pull up an example and go, I see how I'll do it here, but it's not identical.
Right, exactly. Or if you see something example where it's just like, oh, I'm trying to do a form, but my PHX update isn't firing, it's like it's probably the same solution in both places, right?
Got it. So then you've got the HTML side, which is pretty interesting. Tell us about how this. What do we write over here on? So the data exchange looks like. Sorry, the data exchange looks like you're exchanging data classes, like the DTO sort of API aspect.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, you can, so each LiveView like page is basically like you would type it to a specific, I call it a context, like which is like basically what's going into your template. And so you can do, it doesn't have to be, I like using data classes. It can be a data class. It can be a typed dict. It could be a pydantic class. It could probably just be a regular dict. I don't know that I've ever tried that, but I think that should work. But it's just really just for the typing, and it's what will get passed here in template. And then, so maybe it's worth talking through, like there's these sort of different lifecycle components. And so like with your view, there's like the first thing that gets called is there's this mount command. And that gets called anytime, when your view gets instantiated. So when someone visits the page, we're going to create an instance of your class, your LiveView class, and mount will get called with like the socket, which is, probably going to more detail than that, but that's kind of like your interface to the communication. It's not the web socket necessarily. It's more like how you interoperate with the system, and then also the session. So if you want to copy stuff over from the HTTP session, like user information or whatever, you can copy that over in the mount, to your data. Then after that, and that actually gets called. Well, I'll talk about that later. But then after that, there's like an optional. It's not shown in this example, but there's an optional like handle params change, which gets called with path parameters or URL parameters. And the reason that's separate is because your class might get just instantiated once, on when the page is viewed. But you might have like programmatic navigation that's not real navigation. It's like JavaScript navigation, where maybe for things like filter options or pagination options, you want to put those in the URL so that it's kind of bookmarkable and shareable. You don't want to do a full page reload. And so anytime those get changed, including on the initial page load, we'll call a handle params method. And you don't have to implement that if you don't care about it. So that gets called
in this case, a volume is the volume. It doesn't matter where the volume
exactly.
is.
Yeah, but you might want to like be able to bookmark like this is a good volume or whatever. And I think the count example does have that, just to kind of show how it would work.
I see. So in that sense, you get a bit of a deep linking into it.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Exactly
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, it takes advantage of this kind of like JavaScript navigation that you can initiate from the front end or from the back end. Like on the front end, you can initiate like navigation transition that will like basically tell the back end, hey, change your params to this, and the browser takes care of like reading the params and changing the back end takes care of reading the params and changing the state. Or on the back end, you can also tell the front end like, oh, hey, because you did this, I want you to change the URL to be blah blah blah, and here's what the new URL should be.
Okay.
So you can do it both ways. And then the render method gets called, and it's not shown here because the kind of base class basically for the render method, it looks for a template file called like, whatever. This is volume.py, so it looks for volume.html, and it uses that as your template. It also will look to see if there's a volume.css, and will just kind of inject that in as like the CSS for this, if it exists. But if you wanted to, override render, you can, and that's how the t-string rendering works. Is you do provide a render method that returns a t-string. So after all that is done, so that actually happens twice. It happens once for the HTML render, and then it happens again for the LiveView render. And those are handled separately, partially because that's how Phoenix LiveView does it, but also because some things are different. Like when for the initial HTML render, some things are not available. Like you can't do pub/sub stuff to subscribe to channels. You can't do scheduling stuff. It's a little bit more limited to what you can do. But anyway, that's a separate step. And then after render, if an event comes in, this handle event gets called. And what you're showing here for the volume control is kind of like my V1 of the event method that basically just takes like an event. So there's one method called handle event that takes the event, and a payload, which is like a dict of like the options. And then you have the socket. And so you can see here just a bunch of if-else's. Like if the event is key update, then like just take the key as the event name. If it's, on or off, like, change if it's off or they hit the left arrow, then set the volume to 0. If it's on or they hit the right arrow, set the volume to 100. And then there's some stuff that just kind of, bound the volume at the end. And so that's all you do is you kind of basically, this handle event method that gets called, you're updating your state, and then after this gets called, automatically your render method gets called again. And basically you're just re-rendering with the new state. And then again, like on the back end, we're figuring out like, okay, last time you rendered this tree, now you're rendering this tree. What changed? I'm just going to send what changed.
It looks very, I don't know, view or data binding like in here. So when things start up, you say the context of this thing is the volume, an instance of the volume class, and then all you write in your code is like socket.context.volume equals the various plus equals 10, minus equals 10, or equals 0, and somehow PyView says, okay, I've wrapped this thing in some kind of responsive or something that detects the changes, right? Somehow.
Right. Well, yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, we're not even that smart right now. I mean, we could be, and I think Phoenix LiveView is a little smarter about it, where they do wrap and kind of see if they. But like for this, basically we just always render.
I see.
But since we're
So
doing
you re-render the page and you just go, what is actually different about?
Exactly.
Oh, I see. When I re-rendered with new data, then the volume value changed.
Exactly. But it is really nice because, like you're saying, it's like you don't really like your application logic becomes like really simple because it's really just I update my state and then I know how to render my state object and I don't really care about whatever. And even this handle event method, like it's not really, I mean, I don't know. It feels like it'd be a little bit of a stretch to call it stateless because you're mutating state. But at the same time, like you don't really care where the state object came from, right? It's like, given this event, how would I transform this state?
And it's got a very strong Vue.js feel. Like I just changed the properties of the thing, and something makes it happen. That it goes back to everywhere this value is used, it changes.
Exactly, and that's really how it works. I mean, that's the kind of cool thing, where we're talking about HTMX, where you have to be really intentional about like, okay, like how do I want to segment, what I'm changing, and when I do this, I know I want to change this part of the render, this part of the render, and with this, you don't really have to think about it, right? Like you just change what you want to change, and the part of the template that needs to change will naturally change because we're treating it as like this diff operation,
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Let's do one more example. Something that kind of shows off what's possible.
Okay. Well, gosh, there's two things I don't want to show, but like we could do like the maps thing, which is just like a way how to integrate with JavaScript, and then also maybe like one of the newer things would maybe like the counter, like the T-Street version of the counter. So we'd look at the maps one. And so this is like very simple, but this is a thing that like, I think the thing with like frameworks like PyView and other frameworks is like I think maybe people try to bucket into like, oh, you like hate JavaScript or whatever, and like no, I don't hate JavaScript. JavaScript's great at doing JavaScript things, and you do need to like integrate with JavaScript a lot of the times. And there's a lot of really great, rich, interactive JavaScript things that wouldn't really make sense to do in the server. Like so, this is an example of a maps thing using Leaflet JS, which is like a JavaScript library that uses like OpenStreetMap data for doing like a Google Maps, kind of style maps view with tiles and stuff like that. And so this example just kind of shows like, the events, basically there's this hooks system is what they call it on the Phoenix LiveView side and call it the same thing. But basically it's a way to kind of like, we saw things like, PHX key, click, blah, blah, blah is kind of built in event system. So writing JavaScript hooks is a way to kind of let you integrate custom JavaScript and have access to that same event system. So for this, there's a JavaScript component, which is kind of like a wrapper over, not really a wrapper, but a wrapper over some JavaScript stuff that handles this. And so we have events going two ways. And so like, when you click on one of the things in the sidebar, like it sends something to the backend saying, oh, update your state to say you have this national park selected. And then the backend also sends a Maybe I'm getting mixed up with this. I think when you click on the marker, that's where the JavaScript sends the event to the back end.
Yeah, yeah.
Saying
I'll
this,
tell
yeah.
Larry, this is cool. Like if I click, so let me describe it for people. So we've got on one side a map of the United States, and on the left a nice list of the different national parks, the famous ones. If I go entirely into this JavaScript thing and I click on something in the map, one of the points of interest, which is one of these parks, it communicates back to PyView and is selecting it in the list, right? The Python bit. But then again, if I click in the Python bit, like Glacier National Park or one near me, the Olympic National Park, right? Then it will then drive the JavaScript. So this is the bi-directional thing you're talking about. This is very cool.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So so the JavaScript part has access to like a similar component system where it's just like, oh, if I get this event, I think I called it like highlight park, then I know that like, oh, I need to like, turn this marker on. And going the other way, the JavaScript has like its own handler, like, oh, when this happens, then I should call this method on the live view. And so your live view side, like your Python side, stays the same, where it's still doing event handling and also sending events if you need to the front end, but you can get access to like stuff. So, maps, drag and drop stuff is a big one. Even like really rich editors, like I've done something with using like Code Mirror, which is, like a really nice like IDE kind of editing experience in the browser. And so you can still, I think what the thing with PyView, right, is like, it's not, I don't know, for me anyway, it's not about like technology focused. Like I only want to use Python. It's like, I want to have great web experiences, like whatever that takes, but in like a simple way that I can understand and debug, and test, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, this is a very impressive app, I think. Yeah. I mean, I look at it as like, wow, that would be kind of a big project to build. And my feeling is it wasn't that big of a deal with Py.
No, it's that's kind of part of the fun thing with Py. It's like making these little examples is like super fun and also like pretty easy. Yeah, so a similar one, there's like that Kanban board one, just to quickly talk, is a similar thing with drag and drop, but the same kind of concept.
I want to throw out maybe like, just thinking back to that map one real quick before we move on. It feels like this would actually be quite relevant for data scientists as well, right? Like, I don't think you build it as data science, but there's a lot of like, oh, we need to build a dashboard that updates based on whatever, and we need these different visualizations. And with the JavaScript integration, I feel like you probably could do some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think there are a lot of really great JavaScript like graphing libraries. Like one that I've used before is something that I learned about just from figuring out that it's what like Google Notebook, like Google Collab, their like Jupyter Notebooks thing uses called Altair. And that's something which is cool because like there's basically a Python backend for generating the graph data, but then the front end is like this JavaScript thing. And so I do like, I don't think I should put an example of that, but I've used it at work where, we just have like a very simple like graph hook that wraps the Altair library, and the backend generates the graph in Python code. And, it's just super easy to display and things like that. And like, to your point, Michael, one of the really cool things with PyView is because everything is over live socket or WebSockets. Any server push stuff, like if data comes in or data changes, like it's really no work to get to tell the browser to update to like the new state. It's like super, super easy to do, which is cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So the one other thing I wanted to touch on quickly is just because I think the first example we looked at the volume was kind of using the order event. So if you look at like maybe the basic counter T-string version, like the source for that, I mean, it's the same kind of counter example, but like the source is like, I think there's a count T-string file you probably have to click on. And then it's like the third one in the list there. But so this is just kind of just to talk a little bit about like, again, it's kind of a work in progress, but the first version of the events was kind of like, oh, there's a handle event method that all events go to, but that kind of gets to be a little bit of a drag, right? And so we added like this @event decorator, and so you can kind of instead of having like handle event, oh, was the method increment, was it decrement? You can just say @event, decrement, @event increment, and have those separate functions. And then this is also showing like the kind of T-string templating where you use T-strings to generate it. And the cool thing with this too is like on line 58, you can see like basically we're calling like self.button, which is a T-string template, and then we're passing in self.decrement, which is like the method. And so you can kind of like, I mean, it's basically just doing that binding for you automatically, where it ends up.
Okay, hold on. So people, you have a a T string, which is kind of Jinja-like. And in here, you have a format statement. And one of the values you're putting in here is literally the function
Right.
that has the decorator that is an event. And then that gets called back through all the magic.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's cool that it looks like magic, but I mean it's really not magic. I mean the thing is it's like doing the simplest possible thing where basically it's saving you from like if you look at that button method, the button template, it's saying like button phx click equals
I see.
and the function name.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you've created a wrapper function that then basically writes the component bits
Yeah.
that'll wire up all
Exactly.
that
But
looks at yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but this is something I think I'm really excited about because it's like like one of the things that you really want to have like after you've been making a complex app is a way to have components. And that was kind of challenging in the templating system that I originally, started using. Not just to have components because you can have includes and stuff like that, but to fit into like the Phoenix LiveView component system. But I think T-strings are exciting for me because it makes things like this really powerful. And you can think about like, just even things like, having really smart forms and form binding. And I have some of that, but it's a little clunky. And I think being able to have like really nice reusable components that leverage T-strings make it so you have stuff that kind of looks very magically, but it's it's basically just templating. But I'm excited about it. I think it'll make a lot of things easier and easier to kind of share components.
I love it. I really like the programming here, the API. We got a little bit, not a lot, a little bit of time left here. So let's touch on actually just a couple of things. I think one of the issues that, I talked about some of the magic, like some of these frameworks like hide away all the things. Another one where there's these like front end, back end connected all Python. They feel like sometimes you're like, okay. And the way that works is you run it on our cloud system. You know what I mean? Or you run it on our special bit of infrastructure. And then, thoughts immediately go to like, well, how durable, how proven is that? Like, we use Kubernetes? Could we do it there? Like, gosh, I don't even know. So let's talk about some of the internals. And like, at its heart, this is Starlet, right? Which is the same as Fast API in a sense, in terms of how it runs, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's Starlet is doing, all the heavy lifting, and
it handles the WebSockets and everything for you, right?
yeah, the WebSockets, the HTTP, the routing, even middleware, also the authentication, like using it for the authentication. Like I had to do a little bit of work to kind of make that available at the the WebSocket level, in terms of like, because it handles like all the routing, but just the way LiveView works is there's really one WebSocket connection that's getting managed, and then internally there's routing that's done by the framework.
I see.
Like
because you never set that up, right? You don't manage different sockets and like different clients. Like you're just like, I just want to handle event.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But under the covers we're using like their auth system and framework, and so if you use that or familiar with it, it's exactly the same. It's just that we make it also available at kind of like for at the LiveView specific layer. But yeah, that's so anywhere you can run Starlet, and I've been mostly like using it. So like that examples website that we're looking at, that is itself a PyView app that is using just Uvicorn deployed as a Docker container, and that's primarily how I've been using it for apps that I've been writing or at work. Is like it's just a Docker app with Uvicorn. But presumably any any HCI like thing you could use. So yeah, there's no magic there. Yeah, anywhere you want to run it. The one thing is, this is something that's kind of more a future thing, but part of that you don't have to use for a lot of apps, but some of the stuff like presence, like pub stuff that we have built in, just because it's kind of something you want to have when you have this kind of framework to be able to do, like you can do stuff very easily. Like, and I have an example of this, but like oh, this user joined this page, this user left the page, and doing things like that. I don't have a way right now for that to be like multi-machine. It's really just single machine pub sub implementation. And so something I'm kind of working on for the future. But yeah, there's no special requirements. Anywhere you're running a Starlet app or Fast API app or whatever, should be totally fine. You do want to have
So
like sticky sessions set up because it does kind of require you going to the same machine because we have this persistent state for the user.
yeah, that is tricky with WebSockets. I've been dealing with that for a project I'm working on, and it's challenging because, like, okay, the natural inclination and a lot of the recommendation is, oh, how many workers do you want your UV Acorn or your Granian to run?
Yeah.
And oh, if you need to scale up, you just put it behind a load balancer.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It is challenging, but I think it's a solvable challenge, and I think also like it depends on kind of the app that you want. Like for some use cases, I mean, the sticky part you kind of need right now anyway. But for some use cases, maybe you don't care about the pub sub or the presence, or maybe you have a way to deal with that already. Like I know
Right. If you don't care about pub sub or presence, then as long as it just sticks to.
As long as it just sticks, and even the stickiness, I feel like there's potential solutions there, right? Because like with the model, it really is like, like we saw in the examples, like you get past this context to operate on, you make changes to it, and you don't really care like where that came from or where it's running. And so theoretically, I think it feels like there could be a situation where that is somehow distributed or there's some kind of shared storage or, it doesn't seem like impossible. I don't know that it'd be worth the complexity for a lot of use cases, but I feel like there's sort of challenge, and the pub sub stuff I think is something that I plan to kind of address. So I think again, it's like if you're okay with running Redis, then that's a very solvable problem too, having like multi-machine pub sub.
Right. Redis or Valky have like this WebSocket broker thing, kind of, which will manage. Basically, I imagine like your WebSocket connection talks to your server, which then like puts you in the session of a Redis or Valky one, but then that thing actually does the pub sub across the machine.
And that could be interesting for like, I mean, like one of the early things I was thinking is like, oh, could deploy this with like AWS Lambda, which like seems kind of impossible, but then they do have like with their API gateway, they have like a similar, like a WebSocket broker where like they manage WebSocket connections, and you just kind of get events like, oh, this WebSocket client 125 joined, whatever, and then you kind of manage that, and it kind of would be cool. Just I don't know, if a proof of concept or just if you really wanted to host on Lambda or something like that, but it's not. I don't know that I'll get to that anytime soon, But
yeah. Well, certainly an interesting project with the way it is, and could certainly go farther. A lot of the frameworks that are good at this scale out, they don't have any presence or collaboration, so it's fine, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good problem to have. But yeah, it's something we'll figure out at some point. But I think there's still a lot of co-ops you can write without it, so it hasn't been a huge priority.
No, it's very, very neat. All right, so I got two quick questions for you here. One, you mentioned LLMs at the beginning. How do LLMs do with writing PyView? And do you have tips for making it more knowledgeable? Do you have like some sort of specification file you can give to, Claude or something and say,
right,
I know you might not be familiar with this, but here's what it is. Now I'm going to ask you questions to work with it.
That's a really good push. I feel like I should do something like that. So I have used LLMs to like write, like application, not like application code, like using PyView framework, like you're describing at work a lot, and it's been mostly successful. I think one of the things is like, it helps that the templating language, because we're not using 3.14 at work yet for these projects, and so we're using like the older style templates. It helps that language is very, very similar to Jinja 2. And so like that's been great. It does get confused sometimes where like obviously we don't have the same set of built-in filters, and so I might try to use like a filter that's only in Jinja 2 that we don't have, or the include syntax is slightly different. So those that get tripped up on. I think like I've had a lot of success with just really simple prompts like, this is PyView, it's Phoenix LiveView, but in Python, and that's gotten a lot of mileage. Like just even something basic like that.
It sounds like you could create like a Claude skill or an agent or just a set of like really structured rules files, and maybe put it on the docs and say, "Here, grab it," and throw this in?
Absolutely. I for sure should do that. Yeah. And I think that'd be helpful for me too. I think that's something that I kind of, yeah, just even personally want to get better at is like, yeah, I've been using these tools a lot for development and they've been great, but I've been somewhat, lazy in terms of like improving my workflow. And I do see how it's like very successful when people kind of structure these things a little better in terms of like having custom commands or like agents that know about specific things. It does seem like
Yeah,
there's a good
but I
payoff
do
there.
think that your cookie cutter helps,
Right.
right? Because it says, okay, here's the structure, here's a little working bit of it. Now keep building on that. That goes a long ways. So
No, for sure. And I
But-
think even like having things like the just file seem to help in terms of like, it doesn't, it knows like, oh, to run tests, I run just tests. To run type check, I run just type check. Like it kind of knows a lot of this stuff. Doesn't have to guess about it. But it kind of would be useful. I do find it like, it's funny. It seems like the LMs get confused a lot about like, oh, do I need to run poetry run versus just Python? And it seems to always forget like how your project is set up,
Yeah, I know. You gotta keep reminding it. All right, so that was question one. The question two, final question. What's the roadmap? You open to contributors. Where are we?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, it's very early days, and I've tried to like not to be conservative about breaking changes, but I think as we start getting closer to like 1.0, I think I'm at like 0.80, like there probably will be some breaking changes just because like as we've already seen in some of the examples, I've gone through multiple iterations of like how do I make this easier? How do I make this easier?
Right.
And that's been a big focus for me is making it really developer friendly and simple. And so I think I'll try and make some stuff a little more cohesive. So there might be some breaking changes. But yeah, I mean, I want it to be super easy to get up and running, and I feel like there's work to do there. I think, the short-term roadmap is, again, I want to keep working on documentation, updates, examples. I saw a really great, YouTube talk recently called like Verbs Not Nouns about by Brian McDonald about like how to make your documentation more kind of like task-based, like what is the person trying to do versus like explaining technology. So I want to do that. Like I said, I think the T-string templating is like very exciting in terms of like making that better, figuring out like the CSS story around that. That's one thing that's annoying is writing CSS in T-strings because you have to like double escape all the curly braces, Better form support. I mean, I have some initial form support that kind of uses Pydantic to like, but I kind of want to make that a little better. And at work, I've had situations where we have like very complex, like nested forms, and I would love to get to a point where it's just like, yeah, you just here's my Pydantic data model, make a form with error handling and all this stuff and validation, and I kind of want to get there. And then I think again, like larger examples, like I think you called out the Phoenix LiveView, like PyBeats example, like they have this very big music player, and I have some things like that where I have like an AI chat example that are slightly larger, but kind of go into some more examples to kind of inspire people like what can actually be done.
Could you fully implement the live beats thing in PyView?
Yes, I can, and I was thinking about doing it. I think it's interesting, like the history there. I mean, I don't know, but just my intuition is that like part of it was that as they were building certain technologies, they wanted to show them off and have a good test bed. And so like the way that it works is like based on like file uploads, like you upload MP3s that you want to play. And I feel like it's because they wanted to show off the file upload stuff, which was new at the time, I think. And I could do that. I have file upload support. And in fact, I have like even multi-part S3, like very advanced file upload support. But I was thinking about doing it, but just doing streaming. I think I found like a streaming service that is for like royalty-free music if you're using it in a non-commercial way. And I think that might be more exciting to show off like present stuff and even some JavaScript integration stuff and like synchronizing stuff. So, and I think also like I have a simple AI chat thing, but I think maybe beefing that up a little bit would be kind of cool too, because I know people are into AI stuff. But you mentioned like contributions, and I think, yeah, for sure. I think the thing that like, to be honest, would be the most helpful is to have people like, try writing an app, a simple app or a complex app, whatever. And like, I really want to hear like, what works well, like what's rough, what's confusing, like what could be better, like any feedback.
Yeah, more than people contributing features is people just using it to make sure it works and giving feedback on how it should be, right?
Yeah, no, and contribution features are good too. I mean, I recently set up like also just a call like on GitHub, the repo. There's also like a discussions thing that doesn't have a lot of things right there. I mean, there's 2 topics right now, but because I do want to get more feedback and encourage feedback, and like I think that's a great place to put feature suggestions. But yeah, I mean, contributions are also welcome, but I just can't underscore enough how much like I want to have feedback, because again, I want it to be like, I mean, I want it to be a really great app that people feel is fun to use and they like using it and it's easy to get started. And I know that it's not there yet, but any help to getting there is will be great.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Larry, thanks for being on the show. Very cool project. I think people should certainly at least give it a look to see. Maybe it'll help them go get their app up and running. Nice little interactive app, way quicker than maybe they thought they could.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael. Yeah, I really appreciate the chance to come on and talk to you about this. It's been a lot of fun. I can't believe like how much we talked about and how much more we could talk about. So it was real
I've
fun
got a
discussion.
browser full of tabs of things we didn't even get to. So
Yeah,
that's how
sorry.
it goes. No, that's how it goes. All right. Thanks for being here. Catch you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye.